Water. Earth. Fire. Air.
The series is titled Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was released in 2024 on Netflix, where it is told that in ancient times for thousands of years, the four nations lived in harmony, and that peace was realized thanks to the Avatar, who was the only Avatar who was able to master the four elements and maintain the fragile balance between the four nations. When the Avatar dies, their spirits will be reborn in another body in the reincarnation cycle. Since the death of the last Avatar, their new reincarnations have not appeared. Therefore, the cruel leader of the Fire Nation, King Sozin, began a blind attack to rule the world. And his first step was to kill everyone who could stop him, namely the next ruler of the four elements. While the next ruler of the four elements is an airbender who is not ready to carry out his responsibilities as an Avatar. The beginning of the story is shown with a person trying to steal a scroll containing a war plan belonging to the Fire Nation. And he can easily paralyze all the Fire Nation troops, and he is an earthbender. In his escape, he then gave the scroll to one of his colleagues by saying that the Fire Nation would start a war, but not long after the Fire Nation troops managed to catch him. And it turned out that the king of the Fire Nation, namely King Sozin, actually did not feel lost over the war plan, because King Sozin had a bigger plan, where King Sozin cruelly burned the intruder to a crisp. Meanwhile, in an airbender place precisely the Southern Air Temple, a 12-year-old bald boy named Aang was seen, who was seen showing off his airbending abilities to everyone including his teacher named Monk Gyatso. Gyatso scolded Aang for skipping training. Gyatso said that even though Aang was very talented, he still had a lot to learn. Then, not long after, the air nomads from other temples came to celebrate the Great Comet Festival. In short, the Temple Council discussed the cruel King Sozin who would soon attack them. Those who knew Aang was the reincarnation of the Avatar, therefore they asked to send Aang to help save the world. However, Monk Gyatso said that Aang was indeed strong, but he still had a lot to learn to carry out a very difficult task. If Aang could not realize who he was, Aang would fail to become the Avatar, and the world might never recover. Therefore, the Temple Council asked Gyatso to immediately reveal Aang's true identity. In front of the statue of Chen, the last airbender of the airbenders who became the Avatar, Monk Gyatso said that when Yang Chen died, the next Avatar was born in the next country in the reincarnation cycle. So after Yang Chen died, Kuruk was born from the Water Tribe, then Kyoshi from the Earth Kingdom, then Roku from the Fire Nation, which means the next Avatar is an airbender. Then Gyatso said that Aang was the next Avatar. And because the Fire Nation has a dark path that threatens the balance of the world, therefore, only the Avatar is the only person who can master the four elements that can save the world. Gyatso told Aang to leave immediately so he could start practicing other skills. After knowing that, Aang cried in Gyatso's arms, who he considered a friend. That night, because Aang didn't know how to stop the war and restore peace to the four countries, where then he was visited by a six-legged flying cow with an arrow mark named Appa. Not long after that, Aang left the temple with Appa. Meanwhile, along with Aang's departure, King Sozin from the Fire Nation attacked the Airbenders' residence, until there was a fierce battle between the two sides. However, with the stronger power of fire, in the end, all the airbenders were not saved, including Gyatso, Aang's best friend. which means that only Aang was left alone from the Airbender nation. Meanwhile, Aang, who was about to leave in the middle of his journey, was blocked by a big storm. When Aang decided to return, a big storm hit Aang and Appa, causing them to drown. In that situation, Aang suddenly released his avatar power. Long story short, 100 years have passed, while in another part, precisely in the Wolf Bay village where the Waterbender nation is located, a waterbender girl named Katara was seen, who was learning to control water. Where the village was also seen, Sokka, who was Katara's brother, was assigning people to take turns guarding the border because he was assigned by his father to lead the village. When Katara and Sokka were about to catch fish, suddenly a strong current hit them, which made the canoe go fast and took them to an iceberg. Where there, they saw a strange iceberg. While on the other side, Prince Zuko's ship was seen, who was King Ozai's son who was assigned to find the Avatar. When Katara used her powers, suddenly a strong vibration occurred which broke the strange iceberg.
Finally.
Which turned out that Aang suddenly appeared from inside the iceberg and then he fainted. Then Katara and Sokka took Aang to the village. In the village, Katara's grandmother was immediately shocked when she saw Aang. Where the grandmother said that Aang was the only airbender who survived the extinction 100 years ago, since the Fire Nation attacked them all. On the other hand, Zuko was seen arguing with his uncle named Iroh, which Zuko believed that in the village of Wolf Bay there was an avatar that he had been looking for all this time after seeing a very great power earlier. Which is the reason Zuko was looking for the avatar, was so that he could return home to the Fire Nation. That was all because previously Zuko was expelled by King Ozai to look for an avatar. Meanwhile, in the village, Aang was seen waking up from his fainting. Aang was confused because he was already in that place. Meanwhile, Sokka still couldn't accept Aang, who he considered a stranger in their place. Where then Aang asked where Appa was. With all his might, Aang continued to call Appa, until a while later Appa came to him. After that, Aang then told the incident when he left the Southern Temple, which at that time was holding a big comet festival. Katara's grandmother, who heard the big comet, was then shocked, because it was known that the incident had been 1,000 years ago. More precisely, when King Sozin attacked all nations, including destroying all airbenders. And that means that Aang is now over 100 years old. After hearing all these facts, Aang then went to reflect because he had lost all his friends, teachers, and even his place of residence. Not only that, Katara also felt the same thing as Aang when the Fire Nation attacked their village. Which was due to the attack of the Fire Nation, their father and all the waterbenders went to hunt the firebenders. But after that his father never returned. Where Katara also said that the waterbenders and earthbenders continued to fight the invasion of the Fire Nation. Where, since the Fire Nation attacked, there have never been any other nations that have visited each other. After that, Katara invited Aang to the shipwreck to just show her abilities, although Katara still found it difficult to control water. Which Aang then taught Katara to be able to feel the energy to achieve balance. And then after trying it, Katara was finally able to improve her ability to control water. Which not long after that, a Fire Nation ship came to their village. Sokka, who also saw it, then immediately gathered all the young people to prepare. Katara was confused why the Fire Nation came to them, then was told by her grandmother that they were looking for the whereabouts of Aang the Avatar. Arriving at the village, Zuko threatened to destroy the village if they did not immediately hand over an avatar. At first, Sokka was going to hand over Aang, but Katara said that a leader must also protect the weak, which then Katara invited Aang to hide. Meanwhile, Sokka came to Zuko to challenge him to fight. However, the fight was in vain because Sokka was not his match, and that was seen from Zuko, who very easily defeated Sokka.
I'm the one you're looking for.
When Sokka was cornered, Aang then came out and surrendered himself to save Sokka and the village. After Aang left, Sokka intended to save Aang because Aang had helped him. Meanwhile, on the ship, Aang asked Uncle Iroh why the Fire Nation attacked all nations, where Uncle Iroh said that the Fire Nation was trying to create peace in their own way, meaning that all nations would submit to the control of the Fire Nation, which then, unknowingly, Aang managed to take the key from the guard. While on the other hand, Katara and Sokka were preparing to chase Zuko using their canoe, but Katara suggested going on Appa. Meanwhile, Aang managed to escape from the prison cell and enter Zuko's room, where Aang took Zuko's notebook about the avatars, and of course his flying stick. However, his escape was known by Zuko. When Aang flew, Zuko shot Aang until he fell. But luckily, Sokka managed to save Aang in time. At first, they were going to return to the village, but Aang realized that if they returned to the village would be threatened. So Aang decided to go to the Southern Air Temple where he lived. When they arrived there, they saw the temple that had been destroyed by the Fire Nation attack 100 years ago. At that time, Aang saw the body of his friend Gyatso, who had died long ago. Seeing his friend killed, Aang was immediately furious, which accidentally here, Aang reactivated his avatar mode, where it made Katara and Sokka confused about what to do. Which at first, Aang himself could not control himself because he was filled with anger. However, in the end, Aang was able to control himself thanks to the help of Katara and Sokka. After that, Aang cried in Katara's arms. Aang is now determined to fight against the Fire Nation and create peace. Meanwhile, on the other side, Zuko was seen, who was very angry. He also swore to recapture Aang the Avatar. Episode 2 begins with Zuko being angry because the book he has about the Avatars has been lost. Uncle Iroh then tries to calm Zuko down by saying that they will definitely find the Avatar even without the book. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Aang, Katara, and Sokka plan to go to Kyoshi Island, where Avatar Kyoshi came from, because maybe there Aang can find something to later learn the power of the Avatar. At that time, Sokka felt that his task of escorting Aang was complete, so Sokka invited Katara to return to Wolf Bay Village. But Katara refused because she wanted to help Aang save the world, so Sokka had no other choice.
Hey!
A winged lemur!
At that time, Aang found an animal that could also fly, while Katara also found a scroll of water control techniques given by her grandmother. Before going to Kyoshi Island, Aang did not forget to bury Gyatso's body. Which flying animal would also come with them, where they also gave the name Momo to the animal.
Yeah, he looks like a momo, doesn't he?
He tastes like chicken.
While on the other hand, Uncle Iroh took Zuko to a place that was their information center to be able to get information about the Avatar.
Uncle, there's no time for this.
Long story short, Aang, Katara, and Sokka arrived at the Avatar Kyoshi Temple Island,
There would have been signs if he was the Avatar.
where not long after they were caught by the guards of the Avatar Kyoshi Temple and then taken to the village. In the village, Aang told the purpose of their arrival at the place to learn something, at the Avatar Kyoshi Temple. At first, the village leader refused and did not allow them to be there, which will later his daughter named Suki begged the leader, who was also her mother, so that Aang and the others could study something at their place. And because Suki knew that Aang was an avatar who would save the world. Until finally the village leader allowed them, but only within the next 48 hours. Where here it can be seen from the beginning, Sokka and Suki seemed attracted to each other. It also made Sokka look very nervous when he was close to Suki. Meanwhile, on the other side, Zuko's troops asked for a sea map and all reports in the last few hours to Commander Zhao. "Who is the warlord of the Fire Nation who rules the place to look for shark squid?" he said. Meanwhile, when Sokka was cleaning, Suki accidentally saw Sokka's body when he was naked, which immediately made Suki stunned. Meanwhile, Katara was seen, who was now increasingly proficient in controlling water. Katara also invited Aang to train together, but Aang admitted that he had always been known to be very lazy to study. While they were eating, Aang was almost approached by the children there. Yes, even though Aang was the Avatar, he was still a child. Which is known that the village has been hiding for a long time from strangers after the Fire Nation attacked, just like Katara and Sokka's village. They also never received guests, and even in the village no one could master any element. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao had learned from Zuko's crew who were training that Prince Zuko had found an avatar. Then Sin moved to show Sokka and Suki, who were training together. Sokka said that he was a village leader and was very good at hand-to-hand combat. So then Suki taught Sokka to fight.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Aang and Katara tried to find something in the Avatar Kyoshi Temple. But Aang found nothing that could help him master and control his powers. But at that time, Katara got a clue that Aang himself could meet other avatars in his own body, because Aang was the reincarnation of the previous avatars. On the other hand, Zuko was annoyed because Commander Zhao had found out about the avatar's whereabouts on Kyoshi Island. Meanwhile, Suki taught Sokka about how to train his martial arts movements. Where here, the seeds of love between them began to grow. Sokka and Suki also looked increasingly carried away by the romantic atmosphere. Meanwhile, Aang began to meditate to meet Avatar Kyoshi. Suki was even more amazed by Sokka's abilities because he was very fast at learning. Suki also said that even though they were not elemental controllers, they also had to be better than them. Where Suki was also jealous of Sokka, who could explore the world while she couldn't go anywhere, she was only imprisoned in that place to protect the village. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao and his troops were seen arriving at Avatar Kyoshi's place. However, Aang was still meditating to meet Avatar Kyoshi, which Avatar Kyoshi explained that becoming an avatar is a very big responsibility, and the avatar must be strong in order to control his power to protect the weak. Therefore, Avatar Kyoshi told Aang to learn to master all the elements so that he could make him stronger. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao and his troops who arrived at the village immediately searched the place. But then the village leader immediately attacked them so that a fight ensued. Meanwhile, Zuko was seen approaching Aang's whereabouts. Katara, who saw him, then tried to face Zuko. While on the other hand, Aang is still talking to Avatar Kyoshi, where Avatar Kyoshi said that the demands during their Avatar era will be different. Therefore, to become an Avatar, Aang must find out for himself what it means to be an Avatar. And according to Avatar Kyoshi, an Avatar is a knight without mercy who prioritizes every task over their own life. On the other hand, Sokka and Suki were cornered by Commander Zhao's troops, where they also really needed the Avatar's help, while Katara, who tried to face Zuko, also had to be cornered because Katara's ability to control water was still lacking. While Avatar Kyoshi said that Aang's struggle would not be easy if Aang continued to avoid it. But Aang said that let alone saving the world, Aang couldn't even save this village. Then Avatar Kyoshi finally took over Aang's body to show him how to use the Avatar's power. Until finally Katara was saved thanks to Avatar Kyoshi's help.
Impossible.
And finally, the village now has trust and hope again, and they are grateful to the Avatar. Sokka and Suki finally parted again. Although Sokka actually wanted to be around Suki longer, and in the end they made out. Before parting, Suki then gave Sokka his fan. While flying, Aang explained that he could summon one of the avatars when he was in their temple, which Aang also explained that Avatar Kyoshi told Aang to go to the Northern Water Tribe because something bad would happen there, and only Aang could save the Northern Water Tribe. While on the other hand, Commander Zhao invited Zuko to cooperate to capture the Avatar. Zuko agreed, but however Commander Zhao had to keep the Avatar a secret. However, to curry favor with King Ozai, finally Commander Zhao sent this news to King Ozai.
The Avatar has returned.
Episode 3 begins with showing some rebels in the Fire Nation Kingdom, where they also plan to attack and kill King Ozai with the help of a royal crew who turned. When they started their operation, it turned out that they had been trapped, because the royal crew was actually King Ozai's daughter named Azula. Until finally, all the rebels were not safe in the hands of King Ozai. Meanwhile, King Ozai said that Commander Zhao had succeeded in finding the Avatar, where it also made Azula very jealous, because since long ago Azula really didn't like Zuko even though Zuko was her brother. Meanwhile, Katara was seen trying to learn a technique called the Water Whip, which looked very difficult to learn. It was also seen with Katara, who had difficulty and continued to fail when trying, which Aang then taught Katara to remember the person in Katara's mind, to help her feel her energy and feelings so that she could help her control the water. Until where Katara finally remembered her memories with her deceased mother, but she still failed.
Time to go. We shouldn't stay in the same place for too long.
Look!
In short, while heading to the Northern Water Tribe, Aang saw an airbender heading to Amasu, so they chased after him. On the other hand, Commander Zhao is seen contacting his spies who are everywhere to find the whereabouts of the Avatar. Meanwhile, Omasu is a very amazing Earth Kingdom, a place made of various sophisticated and magnificent equipment, where the security to enter there is also very tight. At that time, Katara asked for help from a man named Jet, who wanted to trade in Omasu. So with the help of Jet, they can easily pass through the very tight Omasu security. And after entering Omasu, they parted ways with Jet. Aang immediately chased the person who had flown earlier. But it turned out that the person was not an air controller, but just an ordinary boy. Where not long after that, suddenly there was a bomb explosion that was made by someone.
He's an airbender.
And you're a waterbender.
My name is Sai.
Which boy was named Theo, and he had a father named Sai. Where, according to Theo, the bomb was caused by a Fire Nation spy who was in Omasu. And it is known that Sai himself is a king mechanic, where he has created various equipment for Omasu. Aang, who saw innocent citizens become victims, Aang said that he would help them. Aang also introduced that he was an avatar. Meanwhile, Theo and Aang will look for the source of the bombing, while Sokka, who seemed very interested in the various items in the house, chose to stay to help Sai.
There's the cave!
On the other hand, Zuko finally found out that the Avatar was in Omasu. Then Zuko and Uncle Iroh immediately went there. At that time while training, Katara saw Sai, who was interacting with a mysterious and suspicious person, and which Sai turned out to be a traitor because he had collaborated with the Fire Nation. When Katara was about to come to him, Jet suddenly pulled Katara. Which then Jet and Katara chased the spies, until where it turned out that the Fire Nation spies brought reinforcements. But Jet himself turned out not to be alone. He was also helped by his friends. So in the end, they managed to catch the Fire Nation spies. Meanwhile, on the other side, it was seen that Sokka, who was smart, could help assemble Sai's equipment. Sai, who saw Sokka's intelligence, then said that Sokka should not waste his talent and Sokka should continue to hone his abilities. Meanwhile, Aang and Theo had arrived at the tunnel where they suspected the Fire Nation spies were, while Jet invited Katara to the headquarters, which was his residence. Where in that place there were many of Jet's friends, and they were all orphans who defended the truth. Jet said that Omasu used to be a great kingdom, but now Omasu has changed a lot since the prolonged war, especially with their cowardly and senile king. Even corruption is everywhere, so that the Fire Nation that finds a gap can infiltrate Omasu easily. Jet also said that his family died when the Fire Nation attacked them. Katara told Jet that Katara also always remembered her family, who was also massacred by the Fire Nation. Jet then told Katara to remember her beautiful memories with the one Katara loved, because maybe it would help Katara control her feelings. When Katara tried her technique again by imagining a smile on her mother's face like the rising sun. In the end, Katara was now able to master her technique. Meanwhile, Theo and Aang found a sign of someone who had just come to the place. And how surprised Theo was when he found out that the bomb was an explosive jelly made from boiled sea salt and lead. So that in the end, Aang realized that the explosion was not from a Fire Nation spy. On the other hand, Zuko and Uncle Iroh were seen arriving at Omasu. At that time, they also saw the debris from the bomb that was rumored to have been carried out by a Fire Nation spy. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Azula sent a letter to Commander Zhao, containing an invitation to work together. Aang then informed Sokka of his discovery that the explosion was not from a Fire Nation spy. At the same time, Katara also informed Sokka that the perpetrator of the bombing was not a Fire Nation spy. Katara was sure that the cause of the bombing was Sai, but Sokka concluded that it was Jet because they had found Jet's cloak in the cave along with explosives, which made Sokka and Katara argue until they decided to find the truth about who was wrong. To prove it, Katara then returned to meet Jet, which Jet tells about a mission that they will carry out, where they will exchange the Say luggage that will be given to the King Bumi with a bomb to blow them up, which the Jet group wants to kill the King of the Earth because, according to them, their king is very useless. After knowing that, Katara returned to meet Aang and Sokka. Katara then told him that the mastermind behind everything was Jet. After saying everything, they immediately went to stop Jet. But at that time, they met Zuko, who was there. So that Aang would fight Zuko, while Katara and Sokka were assigned to go to save the King Bumi. Because he was emotional, Zuko was finally forced to use his firepower. Of course, that made the Earth troops come to chase them. Meanwhile, Katara and Sokka arrived just in time so they could save King Bumi.
Protect the king!
Back to Aang, who tried to help put out the fire. Meanwhile, Uncle Iroh told Zuko to leave immediately while he would attract the attention of the guards. So that in the end, Aang was arrested by the Earth troops because he was considered to have messed up. Episode 4 begins with Aang being shown with Uncle Iroh in a prison cell. Aang also looks upset because Zuko is the cause of all that. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Zuko dares to save Uncle Iroh by disguising himself as one of the Earth Kingdom soldiers. While Sokka asks whether Sai has helped the Fire Nation, Sai then says that he was faced with a difficult choice, so he was forced to cooperate with the Fire Nation. Which Theo, who knows the truth, is very disappointed with Sai. Then Katara comes and informs him that Aang has been imprisoned. Sin is then shown 100 years ago, precisely when Aang was visiting Omasu, where at that time Aang had a friend named Bumi in Omasu, and Aang then told Uncle Iroh. However, now Aang does not know whether Bumi is still alive or not. Meanwhile, Uncle Iroh also said that he had owed a lot to Prince Zuko. Meanwhile, because Sokka had found out that Aang was in prison, Sokka then asked for Sai's help. But Sai said that it was impossible for them to enter Omasu prison. But at that time, Theo said that Sai had seen a secret tunnel leading to the palace. So in the end, Sai agreed to help. Where at that time, Uncle Iroh was taken to the trench to be punished, while Aang would be taken to see the king. While preparing, Sai received a letter from the Fire Nation spy. Sokka, who found out, said that they had to tell the king all of this so that the Fire Nation spies could be caught. Meanwhile, Aang finally met King Bumi. But something unexpected and surprising happened, where the king of the Earth Nation turned out to be Aang's childhood friend who was named Bumi, who is now a king.
Very good at rock skipping.
Boomy?
Hello, Aang.
How are you still alive?
Clean living.
Meanwhile, Katara, who was getting ready to save Aang, was then approached by Jet, where Jet then attacked Katara because she was considered a traitor. However, Katara, who had mastered her powers, was finally able to defeat Jet easily.
Nothing like the Firebenders.
Meanwhile, Zuko, who was disguised as a soldier, finally found out that Uncle Iroh was taken to the trench while Aang was taken to the king. However, Zuko chose to save Uncle Iroh first. On the other hand, King Bumi entertained Aang with a lot of food. At that time, King Bumi teased Aang, who disappeared when the world needed him. King Bumi, who was annoyed with Aang, then said that even though he was over 100 years old, Aang had not lived 100 years. On the other hand, Katara and Sokka had arrived at the tunnel, but when they arrived there, they found a group of people playing music. When Sokka asked where the tunnel was, the people said that the tunnel to the palace was on the other side. The people also told about the story of the formation of Omasu, which at first Omasu were two humans who fell in love with each other, but they were in different villages. It is also told that at that time their villages were hostile, but their love was so strong that in the end, they made a tunnel so they could meet secretly. However, one day Oma never came because she had been killed. So Su uses the power of the earth element to conquer both villages. And finally, after the war, the two villages built a new city called Omasu. Meanwhile, while escorting Uncle Iroh, an earth element guard apparently has a personal grudge against Uncle Iroh because Uncle Iroh killed his brother in basing. On the other hand, King Bumi brings Aang to face the game he started to test whether Aang is ready to become an avatar. On the other hand, Katara and Sokka enter the tunnel by following the crystal light as in the instructions, which says, "Love shines in the darkness." While the guard still held a grudge against Uncle Iroh, where he said that he used to be just a soldier who did his duty. Then we are taken flashback to the past, when Uncle Iroh's son named Luten died during the war. At that time, Zuko approached Uncle Iroh by saying Luten would be proud to have a father like Uncle Iroh. With Zuko's affection, Uncle Iroh finally had hope and enthusiasm to live his life. He was determined to help and train Zuko so that he could become a better person. Meanwhile, Katara and Sokka, who were exploring the tunnel, suddenly they were blocked by a dead end. And when they were about to return, the path was also closed, which turned out that the tunnel could move by itself. On the other hand, King Bumi took Aang to the final test so that whether Aang was worthy of being the Avatar. Bumi will also teach Aang about what responsibility and sacrifice are. The last game is not a joke. Aang must fight directly against King Bumi until who wins. On the other hand, Sokka and Katara were approached by a ground creature, while Zuko was seen coming to save Uncle Iroh from the prison. In the ground tunnel, Katara and Sokka struggled to escape from the animal, but again and again the path suddenly became a dead end. When they apologized to each other and surrendered, the animal did not attack them. And it turned out that love shines in the darkness. That meant the animal and which animal turned out to be blind. Katara and Sokka then asked the animal to take them to the palace. Meanwhile, in the palace, the fight between Aang and King Bumi took place, where the point of the fight was to show that to become the Avatar, Aang must understand the meaning of being willing to sacrifice. King Bumi then dropped rocks on Aang and also on himself, which made Aang confused about who to save. However, at that critical moment, Katara and Sokka came to help, so that finally King Bumi was saved. But then King Bumi said that all of that was cheating. But Aang said that they could also rely on friends. Aang added that even with a friend they could save the world. Where it turns out that King Bumi also knows that the Fire Nation troops will come to attack them. Because it turns out that King Bumi has used the information from Sai, who has been willing to share information about the Fire Nation spies. But before Aang leaves, King Bumi has one more challenge for Aang to play with him. Meanwhile, Zuko is seen to have succeeded in bringing Uncle Iroh out of prison. They also left the place using a canoe, where we will also be brought back to flashback, where at that time Uncle Iroh was willing to accompany Zuko in his exile to find the Avatar, because Zuko needed a friend. And when he was about to go to the ship, Zuko saw Appa flying past them. Episode 5 begins with Aang, Katara, and Sokka being chased by the Fire Nation troops. Katara is seen, who is now increasingly proficient in controlling the water element, and they are now getting closer to the Fire Nation. At that time, they were shocked to see a lot of forests that had been burned, which of course the forest was burned by the Fire Nation troops. Because of that, Aang felt guilty again because he should have been there to protect the forest. Then Katara advised Aang by telling Aang to forget the past because they had to focus on the future. While in the forest, Sokka met a little girl who was lost. Sokka tried to make the little girl not afraid of him, but then the little girl left after hearing Katara and Aang's screams looking for Sokka. They then chased the little girl to a village, where when they arrived at the village, the residents looked scared when they saw them. The father of the little girl finally told that their village had been affected by the prolonged war. In addition, the forest had been destroyed by fire controllers who burned the forest just to open a road across the mountain. After the fire, many strange things happened, such as plants that withered and livestock that no longer farmed because it seemed like their land had been infected with a disease. It was also told that the other day, there was someone from the village who went to hunt for food, but they never returned. Which was also strange. It was likely that they might have gotten lost in another world. On the other hand, Lieutenant G said that they had received information about children playing with ice when ice should not have been there. Meanwhile, in the palace, Ajula was seen trying to curry favor with his father by praising Commander Zhao for finding the Avatar. Azula also asked King Ozai to provide additional soldiers to Commander Zhao. However, King Ozai, who knew that Azula was only licking King Ozai, then provoked Ajula, regarding that Zuko was the one who actually found the Avatar, not Commander Zhao. Yes, that certainly made Ajula even more jealous of Zuko. Meanwhile, it is said that in this world there are two realms, namely the human world and the spirit world, where there is a place where the border between the human realm and the spirit world is thin, and that is what causes the villagers to disappear. They then search for the entrance to the spirit world in the forest, and after finding it, Aang then tries to enter the spirit world while Katara and Sokka will guard Aang's body. Not long after, Aang finally managed to enter the spirit world, which, but unexpectedly, Katara and Sokka were also taken to the spirit world. Meanwhile, on the other side, Zuko and Uncle Iroh have arrived at a village of earthbenders. At that time, Uncle Iroh and Zuko asked about the Avatar and a waterbender to the barkeeper, and which turned out they found out that the Avatar was traveling with a waterbender in their area. And knowing that everyone already knew the whereabouts of the Avatar certainly made Zuko even more emotional. Because of that, it must not only be him who is looking for the Avatar, there will be many bounty hunters who are also looking for the Avatar. where in that place Zuko and Uncle Iroh met June the bounty hunter, and where the spirit world and the human world are interconnected like spirits and bodies but separate. At that time, Aang met the spirit of knowledge, a large bird. But Katara and Sokka couldn't see it. The spirit said that humans, aka Sokka and Katara, should not be in that place because there would be many creatures targeting them if they didn't leave immediately. But because Aang insisted, the spirit of knowledge told him that there was someone who lived in the stone cottage at the end of the road who might know the whereabouts of the people Aang was looking for. But they have to keep following the path to be safe. Meanwhile, on the other side, Ajula, who is training, looks very emotional because King Ozai always brags about Zuko. While at that time, Uncle Iroh hired June the bounty hunter to find the Avatar. However, Zuko initially disagreed, but after being advised by Uncle Iroh, Zuko finally agreed. In the spirit world, Aang, Katara, and Sokka had to get terror from invisible creatures, which then an evil spirit attacked them. It also made them scattered, and which their powers could not be used in that place. So they had to work together to escape from the disturbing spirit. At that time, Sokka, who was separated, met a fox-shaped spirit, which fox said that the spirit chasing Sokka was not a monster. The fox also added that the spirit was only injured. And after that, Sokka then went to look for Katara and Aang. On the other hand, Katara suddenly got a jump scare that immediately moved her to her house in the past, where her mother and all her family were still alive. At that time, Katara was confused because she couldn't use her powers, which then suddenly they were attacked by the Fire Nation, which killed everyone. That's when Katara realized that it was all her memories when she was little when the Fire Nation attacked them. And finally she saw her mother die and was killed by a firebender when she sacrificed herself to save her. While on the other hand, Sokka also suddenly moved to the time when she was first inaugurated because she managed to pass the ice avoidance test. But at that time, it was revealed that Sokka actually passed the test thanks to the help of her friend. Sokka, who knew the truth, finally felt sad and disappointed and began to despair. On the other hand, Aang was also looking for Katara and Sokka, who were separated just like that. Same as Sokka and Katara, Aang also moved to a time when the Southern Air Temple was still intact. But Aang realized that all of that was just an illusion. And it turns out that the illusion was caused by a spirit named Ko, while Aang was not affected by the illusion because he was an avatar. Ko said that the Avatar had actually tried to kill him in the past, which then Ko asked if the Avatar would return what he stole from him. Until finally Aang arrived at the stone cottage, which turned out to be where Aang met Gyatso, and it was not an illusion. How surprised Aang was when he could meet again with Gyatso, the teacher who was also his friend. Gyatso explained that many airbenders died while fighting the Fire Nation, and those who died chose to reincarnate. But Gyatso chose not to because he knew Aang would need him. Suddenly, Aang remembered Sokka and Katara, where Gyatso also explained that the place was guarded by the spirit of the Face Stealer, and the spirit would deliberately trap helpless people and hold them until he would then eat them. And if that happens, then the spirit of the person who was eaten will then disappear forever. Which Ko is a dangerous spirit, and it is impossible to defeat him. Where the previous Avatar, Avatar Roku, had fought Ko, and it is said that Avatar Roku had defeated him, which means that Aang had to meet Avatar Roku to ask. But as usual, Avatar Roku was in the Fire Nation. Therefore, Aang had to take the risk. Gyatso added that even though Aang was in the Southern Air Temple when the Fire Nation attacked, Aang would not have been able to stop it. After that, Aang said goodbye to Gyatso. After returning, Aang immediately went to the Avatar Roku Temple in the Fire Nation. Aang assigned Appa and Momo to guard Katara and Sokka while Aang was away. Sin turned to Prince Zuko, who looked lonely, while Commander Zhao received a letter from the palace. While Aang finally arrived in the Fire Nation. Episode 6 begins with a flashback where a young Zuko is seen preparing to attend a war meeting for the first time. And back to the present, Zuko is seen scolding Lieutenant G for changing the ship's course. However, Lieutenant G said that they received new instructions from Commander Zhao, who had been appointed admiral by King Ozai, and Commander Zhao was assigned to lead the Avatar capture operation. Lieutenant G also seemed unwilling to listen to Prince Zuko's instructions. Prince Zuko, who felt like he had been betrayed by his own crew, Uncle Iroh then advised them all, especially Lieutenant G. However, Lieutenant G became even more emotional and even said that Prince Zuko was not worthy of leading them because they were always cursed and scolded by Prince Zuko. Uncle Iroh then told a pack that Zuko knew more about what sacrifices were than them. Meanwhile, Aang was seen arriving at Avatar Roku's temple. At first, there seemed to be no one there, but then the sages appeared, which should have been wise, but then the sages attacked Aang even though they knew that Aang was the Avatar. But at that time, fortunately, Aang was helped by one of the sages. While on the other hand, June had found Aang's whereabouts, and a great sage who helped Aang was named Shu, which Shu believed that the Avatar was the bringer of peace. But unfortunately, the great sage and the others believed that King Ozai was the bringer of peace, which Shu was known to be the grandson of Avatar Roku. At that time, Shu was willing to hold back the sages so as not to disturb Aang, who was meditating to meet Avatar Roku. When Aang met Avatar Roku, it turned out that Avatar Roku was quite a humorous person. At that time, Avatar Roku said, "Why did Aang take so long to meet him?" Avatar Roku also said that every avatar would be different. According to Avatar Kyoshi, the avatar is a tough knight without mercy. But according to Avatar Roku, the avatar must also be a wise diplomat. At that time, Aang asked Avatar Roku about Ko, but it was discovered that Avatar Roku was also afraid to Ko. Indeed, Avatar Roku once fought Ko, but Avatar Roku only took something from him, not defeated him. What Avatar Roku took from Ko was a totem of the mother of all faces that gave faces to all living things, and the totem was Ko's mother, which Aang could use as a means of exchange with Ko. Before Aang left, Avatar Roku said that for the Avatar, friends could be a burden. When he returned, Aang was surprised to see the sages lying paralyzed, and it turned out that June was the one who had done all that. June then gave Aang a little advice that, if Aang was smart, he should just sit back until the chaos subsided and then look for opportunities from the remnants of the destruction. According to him, the world is now as good as it is now. And of course, Zuko was happy because he had returned the Avatar, where June told Zuko to be careful, because there would be many hunters who would hunt the Avatar. Aang then begged Zuko to let him go, because Aang wanted to save Katara and Sokka immediately. Aang promised to surrender after saving his friends. Aang also knows that Zuko must have also experienced a lot of pain and loneliness. Suddenly, Aang's words reminded Zuko of the war meeting in the past. At that time, Zuko was asked by King Ozai about the strategy for carrying out the attack. But Zuko, who was still new, certainly did not know that the general would sacrifice some of the Fire Nation troops. Where Zuko, who was compassionate, did not like the method, he said that the plan was very bad, so that Ozai, who was angry, told Zuko to fight. In the middle of their journey, they were ambushed by Commander Zhao's troops. Commander Zhao said that Zuko had violated orders. Therefore, Commander Zhao will take over everything. Even now, Commander Zhao has the archer Yuyan, who was given directly by Ozai. So because he could not do anything, Zuko could only surrender to hand over Aang, which Commander Zhao will then take the Avatar to Po Huai Fortress, a fortress that is very difficult to penetrate, which is why Uncle Iroh forbade Zuko to go there because it was very dangerous. He also told Zuko to be patient first. Meanwhile, in the fort, Commander Zhao was seen feeling proud because he had captured the Avatar. Commander Zhao also made a story about how difficult it was for him to capture the Avatar. After that, Commander Zhao celebrated in front of all the personnel by saying that they should celebrate their victory in capturing the Avatar. Meanwhile, outside, a person wearing a mask was seen lurking around the fort. When the guards brought a drink cart that was going to enter the fort, the masked person then quietly slipped into the fort. After being in the fortress, the masked man then killed several troops who were guarding the prison cell. Then the masked man saved Aang, and who knows who the person behind the mask is. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao was very surprised because the Avatar had escaped. After their escape was discovered, the masked man and Aang were finally attacked by all the troops there. Aang and the masked man immediately became a solid team, and with good cooperation they managed to get through the existing troops. But unfortunately, the guards managed to attack them with fire. When in a desperate situation, the masked man threatened to kill the Avatar. So Commander Zhao, who needed the Avatar alive, finally let the masked man go with the Avatar. But it turned out that Commander Zhao's plan was to shoot the masked man from afar by the archer Yuyan, and which turned out that the masked man was Zuko. When the soldiers checked the whereabouts of the masked man, they only found Zuko's sword. Meanwhile, when Zuko woke up, Aang tried to treat him, but Zuko refused. At that time, Aang tried to befriend Zuko. Aang also did not forget to apologize for stealing Zuko's book at that time, and because of the book, Aang was greatly helped. Aang also asked why Zuko wanted to catch him so much. Zuko then explained that if he could catch Aang, he could go home and become the successor to the throne of the Fire Nation, because everyone in the Fire Nation expected the throne. However, Aang said that Zuko did not need to care about other people's expectations, because Zuko would definitely be able to become a firebender who was different from the Fire King so far, who had always been arbitrary, where Zuko could also be a king who was free and compassionate. However, Zuko believed that being compassionate was a sign of weakness. Then, we were taken back to the time when Zuko had to fight his own father for insulting his military strategy. In the fight, Zuko tried to keep avoiding it, and when Zuko had the opportunity to beat his father, he didn't. King Ozai then said that Zuko should get rid of his compassion because it was a sign of weakness. Yes, that's when Zuko got his burns from Ozai. When Zuko woke up, Aang was seen escorting Zuko to the lifeboat. And before parting, Aang said that 100 years ago he had a friend in the Land of Fire. Aang also said if they had met at that time, would they have been friends? Meanwhile, while waiting for Zuko, Uncle Iroh said to Lieutenant G about Zuko being too much and always caring about all his crew. Where all of that was a fact, because after Zuko competed with King Ozai felt he had made a mistake in making Zuko soft. So then King Ozai sent Zuko to wander outside so he could learn the harshness of the outside world. Where King Ozai assigned Zuko to go find the Avatar, King Ozai also said that Zuko was not allowed to set foot in the Land of Fire before his task was completed, and Zuko was also allowed to bring Division 41, which should have been sacrificed during the war. After knowing everything, Lieutenant G and the entire crew were certainly very touched. So when Zuko returned to the ship, in the end all the crew, including Lieutenant G, became respectful and honored Prince Zuko, because they knew how much Prince Zuko sacrificed for them. Meanwhile, Aang also returned to the spirit world to exchange the mother totem that Ko was looking for by exchanging Katara and Sokka along with all the villagers he had captured, so that everyone could finally return. But when Aang returned to the Stone Thug, it turned out that Gyotso had disappeared, which turned out to be Aang's last meeting with Gyotso, who was his friend and teacher. At that time, Uncle Iroh saw the mask used by Zuko during the mission to save Aang. Episode 7 begins with Commander G looking panicked, where Commander G said that the Royal Guard would arrest Zuko because he was known to have betrayed him. And Commander G got the news when he was on Commander Zhao's ship to check the fuel when he was drinking with Commander Zhao's personal. At that time, he heard that King Ozai had sent his guards to bring Prince Zuko home to be tried because he was known to have betrayed him. Uncle Iroh was sure that Commander Zhao had complained to Ozai that Zuko had betrayed him. After knowing this, Uncle Iroh then told Zuko to immediately go save himself, while Uncle Iroh would convince Ozai. But it turned out that Commander Zhao had trapped Lieutenant G because the news that King Ozai would punish Zuko was not true, and it was all Commander Zhao's plan to kill Zuko. On the other hand, Aang was seen feeling that Zuko was a very lonely person. Until where the short story finally Aang, Katara, and Sokka arrived at the Northern Water Tribe. They were greeted by the people of the Northern Water Tribe. They were greeted by Arnuk, the leader of the Northern Water Tribe, as well as a teacher named Pakku, and Arnuk's daughter named Yue. Meanwhile, Aang told Arnuk about Aang's vision that saw that the Northern Water Tribe would be attacked, But Arnuk also turned out to have known about it because they always watch the movements of the Fire Nation. They are now very happy because their city has an avatar. On the other hand, Commander Zhao said that he did not know who the bomber was. Then Uncle Iroh said that King Ozai would not hesitate to eliminate his own son just to conquer the world. Which is now known, Commander Zhao has been appointed to lead the Great Fleet to conquer the Northern Water Tribe. Meanwhile, in the Fire Nation, Azula looks disappointed with King Ozai because she has always been ignored. But Azula is sure that Azula is the one who deserves to replace the king of the Fire Nation. While they were eating, Sokka kept looking at Princess Yue, where Sokka said that he felt like he had met Princess Yue. Meanwhile, Aang also felt that he was no longer aware of wanting to learn more in the Northern Water Tribe. At that time, Pakku said empathy for the Southern Water Tribe that had been destroyed. Pakku then told Katara to go to Master Yagoda to study, where when Princess Yue left, Sokka was also seen following her, which Princess Yue is a spiritual leader in the Northern Water Tribe. Until finally Sokka and Princess Yue chatted. As usual, Sokka the playboy was nervous again when facing a beautiful woman. But over time, they got closer. At that time, Sokka said that he felt like he had met Yue. But not long after, Han came to them. Han also said that the dinner would be over soon. Where at that time, Aang was asked to share information about the Fire Nation soldiers. And also Aang was asked for advice on the upcoming battle strategy. But Aang said that airbenders focus more on defense. Pakku then said that the Avatar must be very overpowered. But Aang was honest about not having mastered the 4 elements. However, they said that they had heard about Aang, who managed to defeat many Fire Nation troops and save many villages. Aang also added that he could do all that thanks to the help of Sokka and Katara. Meanwhile, Katara came to Master Yagoda's place. In that place, Katara was taught how to heal people using water flow. Then Katara said about when they could practice war. However, Master Yagoda said that women should not fight, and it is a tradition in the Northern Water Tribe that women are not allowed to fight. Meanwhile, Han shared various information about the place with Sokka. Then Sokka asked Han about Princess Yue. Han said that he was once engaged to Princess Yue, but when they were 16 years old, Princess Yue called off the engagement. On the other hand, Aang then visited the Avatar Kuruk Temple to ask for help and guidance regarding the war they would face. Princess Yue then said that it had been a long time since anyone had visited the Avatar Kuruk Temple, because during his life when Avatar Kuruk was needed, he was never there because Avatar Kuruk was only obsessed with the spirit world. In short, when Aang met Avatar Kuruk, without further ado, Aang immediately said that the Northern Water Tribe would be destroyed by firebenders. Therefore, Aang asked Avatar Kuruk for help, so that later when the war occurred, Avatar Kuruk would take over his body, as Avatar Kyoshi had done. However, Avatar Kuruk said that he could not do it, because he had been injured a lot due to being in the spirit world for too long to guard the border. At that time, there were so many spirits who wanted to enter the human world. So because of that, Avatar Kuruk dedicated himself a lot to fighting spirits without the knowledge of the people in the Northern Water Tribe, where his wife died because her life was taken by Ko. Avatar Kuruk also added that the Avatar had to fight alone. Sokka then returned to meet Princess Yue. It turned out that they had met. Sokka realized that the fox spirit who met him in the spirit world was Princess Yue. Princess Yue told Sokka that when she was a baby, she was very sick. At that time, her father begged the Moon Spirit to save her. The Moon Spirit granted the prayer. The Moon Spirit then gave a little of its spirit to Yue to heal her. That's why Yue was able to cross the spirit world easily. Sokka then said that he had heard that his father was disappointed with him. However, Princess Yue saw that Sokka was the type of person who always cared about his friends. Sokka then asked about why Yue rejected Han. Yue said that even though Han was a good man, he was not the man of her dreams. Then after returning, Aang said that Avatar Kuruk could not help them. Meanwhile, Katara was seen protesting about why women should not join the war. Katara also said why they were still driven by this stupid tradition, when women should also be able to help in the war. But Pakku still doesn't want to change his perspective that women are weak. Aang also says that maybe they should follow Paku's words, because this battle will be different, and Aang might not be able to protect them. Meanwhile, the Fire Nation fleet was seen approaching the Northern Water Tribe, which Commander Zhao will carry out a frontal attack strategy, and it turns out that Commander Zhao has a secret weapon. And it turns out that Zuko still survived the explosion at that time, so Uncle Iroh gave the information to Zuko. But Zuko didn't care, because he just wanted to catch the Avatar again. Uncle Iroh was suspicious that Commander Zhao had colluded with someone in the palace. Meanwhile, in the palace, Azula was tired of playing around. She didn't want to obey King Ozai's orders anymore. Azula was seen emitting an electric shock indicating that Azula was ready. Azula then asked King Ozai to give her a real mission. Meanwhile, Sokka encouraged Katara regarding the fact that no one could stop them. Then Katara planned to challenge Paku to a match. At that time, Katara challenged Paku to a one-on-one fight with her. Because he was annoyed, Paku finally accepted the challenge. At first, Katara couldn't keep up with Paku, but Katara didn't want to give up and got back up. Until finally, Katara was able to corner Paku. So Paku finally acknowledged Katara's greatness. However, Paku still did not allow Katara to join the fight. Meanwhile, the children who watched the match were amazed to see Katara because she was able to corner Paku. After that, Katara and Sokka reassured Aang about that they could take care of themselves. Katara also said that they were a family who would help each other, so that Aang did not need to be alone as the Avatar because he had friends who could help him.
Fire Nation's here.
Time to fight.
Episode 8 begins with Aang, Katara, and Sokka attacking a Fire Nation warship. They work together to destroy the ship and the Fire Nation troops on board. After destroying one ship, they then plan to destroy another Fire Nation ship. However, it turns out that the Fire Nation fleet that will attack is so much, so they decide to return. Meanwhile, Zuko, who really wants to defeat the Avatar, Uncle Iroh then tells Zuko to enter the city through a tunnel with warm water flowing. While Aang informs that the Fire Nation troops are so many, so Aang suggests that they better strengthen their defenses. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao shows his secret weapon, a hot air balloon that can take them across the fortress, which ironically, the hot air balloon is a Sai designed from Omasu, who is also assisted by Sokka. So where not long after that, the war finally began. The Water Tribes worked together as hard as they could to hold off the attacks from the Fire Nation army. In a war situation that was so intense, Katara forced Paku to allow women to join the war, because their chances of winning were very small. At that time, Master Yagoda was also seen persuading Paku, so that in the end Paku agreed. Not only Katara and the others, Princess Yue also seemed to want to join the fight, but Arnuk forbade it because Yue had to continue the throne if something happened to her. Then Arnuk told Sokka to keep Yue safe. That night, the Fire Nation troops attacked with fireballs to distract the waterbenders. Meanwhile, Commander Zhao and Uncle Iroh and several troops left using a hot air balloon, which Commander Zhao had a cunning plan. Namely, Commander Zhao would kill the Moon Spirit, because the Water Tribe believed that their lives came from the Ocean Spirit, and their strength came from the Moon Spirit. Where one night the spirits transformed into physical form and became mortal creatures called Yin-Yang. Meanwhile, Aang received a warning from Avatar Kuruk about his chosen knife approaching, and which knife was made of spirit world material. Meanwhile, Uncle Iroh tried to stop Commander Zhao from killing the Yin-Yang spirit, because Yin and Yang are signs of the balance of nature. However, Commander Zhao said that he would only kill the Moon Spirit so that the Water Tribe could not use their powers. Avatar Kuruk said that if the Fire Nation killed Yin and Yang, it would make nature unbalanced. At that time, Momo was seen dying from being hit by a building while helping one of the water controllers. Princess Yue then ordered Momo to be taken to the most sacred place in the north. And in that place, finally Yue managed to save Momo. From under the tunnel, Juko was seen, who finally managed to infiltrate the palace. Meanwhile, Sokka and Yue saw Commander Zhao and his personnel successfully enter the place. Commander Zhao then looked for the whereabouts of the Moon Spirit. Meanwhile, Aang, who tried to stop Commander Zhao, was blocked by Zuko. But Katara told Aang to leave, while Katara would invite Zuko by one. In short, Aang arrived at the holy place, and Aang met Sokka and Princess Yue. Then Aang said that Commander Zhao would kill the moon and ocean spirits. However, Aang was too late, because Commander Zhao had found the form of the yin-yang spirit, which transformed into a fish. Aang tried to prevent Commander Zhao, but Commander Zhao ignored Aang, and Commander Zhao finally managed to capture the moon spirit, which Aang begged Commander Zhao not to kill the moon spirit. But Commander Zhao, who also wanted to rule the world, still ignored Aang, because according to him, Aang was no longer valuable. Until finally, Commander Zhao managed to kill the moon spirit. Which immediately the moon spirit disappeared from the face of the earth. The waterbenders were now unable to use their powers, because the moon spirit was no longer there. And because they could no longer use their powers, Arnuk then ordered all his troops to retreat. But Han said he would hold and protect them all even without power. On the other hand, Uncle Iroh was angry with Zhao for killing the moon spirit. But now there is no more hope, because the moon spirit has disappeared and they can't do anything now. So where to save the world, Aang then surrendered himself to the ocean spirit so that the ocean spirit would finish everything off, even though that means Aang will also disappear from the world. The figure of a monster appeared, a figure from the embodiment of unstoppable anger. Meanwhile, Zuko met with Uncle Iroh. Uncle Iroh said that the Avatar is now gone. So Uncle Iroh then told them to leave. At that time, Zuko, who had a grudge against Commander Zhao, finally invited him to fight one-on-one. Of course, Commander Zhao was surprised because Zuko was still alive. When cornered, Commander Zhao said that all this time, Zuko's mission was just a kind of bait, because King Ozai deliberately used Zuko to motivate his sister, which all this time, who helped and provided all the resources and appointed him as admiral, was Azula. And without any mercy, Zuko finally killed Commander Zhao until he was burnt to a pulp. Meanwhile, the monster figure finally attacked and slaughtered all the troops and fleets of the Fire Nation. After destroying everything, Katara then tried to revive Aang, but no matter what, Aang was no longer in the world. On the other hand, Princess Yue realized that she was part of the Moon Spirit, so Princess Yue sacrificed and returned the Moon Spirit in her to revive the Moon Spirit. Sokka couldn't do anything and could only watch his crush disappear forever. Now the Moon Spirit has returned, and the Ocean Spirit has also returned to the sacred place of the Northern Water Tribe. It turns out that Aang also managed to survive. After the war, the Fire Nation fleet was destroyed. And from that war, many victims fell. Even Han was one of the victims. Sokka then apologized for failing to protect Yue, but Arnuk said no one could stop Yue because she had her own thoughts, and therefore no one could stop her. where Pakku also apologized to Katara because he was always influenced by adhering to tradition. And thanks to Katara, Pakku realized that Katara was a waterbending master. Pakku asked Katara to teach waterbending to the Northern Water Tribe. Meanwhile, nothing was left of the Fire Nation troops. Uncle Iroh and Zuko were just waiting for their pickup from Lieutenant G, who was away from the battle. While Aang apologized for failing to protect the Northern Water Tribe, but they did not blame Aang, because it was all war. And in war, there must be destruction. Aang, Katara, and Sokka then said goodbye because they had to immediately prepare themselves to face the next attack, and because Aang had to immediately master the 4 elements. Katara will also teach Aang the water element, and they will learn the earth element in Omasu. Meanwhile, on the other side, King Ozai received news that the armada led by Commander Zhao had lost the battle, while the Avatar was still alive. However, King Ozai had suspected it, because which turned out King Ozai deliberately attacked the Northern Water Tribe was to divert the world's attention because in fact, King Ozai had assigned Azula to conquer Omasu. And it turns out Omasu has now fallen into the hands of the Fire Nation, because it turns out Ozai no longer cares about Zuko, and Ozai deliberately sacrificed Zuko because he was weak. Omasu was also seen to have collapsed by Azula, and Ozai was very proud of him, which is told that the next Fire Nation will welcome a large comet. And Avatar: The Last Airbender Season 1 is over. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And see you in the next video.